Um, yeah, so the roles playbook will be interesting to see. It'll be I think you're right on that it'll be some combination of North Dakota State, some combination of the Lions, the Bears. We'll see a little bit of combination of that. I would expect to see a kind of an old school looking running game, multiple blocking backs on the field. You have tight ends and all that, just like we saw when he was here. You get some of that Maryland Iron in there, all that. It's going to be fun to watch that stuff, but that means you're also going to see. And another reason I think Jalen Rayner is a really great fit is because with pro style stuff, you're talking about like a play action stretch left with a rollout back to the right. A guy with Jalen Rayner's ability, running ability, and his ability to throw on the run, that's huge when you're running that kind of stuff. When you're running that type of play action, and those schemes can get a lot of people open. So, I really do like the fit here as far as this offense. Maybe and this could actually be a better fit for Connor Mobley's skill set too. I don't know if he was perfect for running the shotgun RPO thing all the time. The way like Rocco was able to do it fairly successfully, though not as good as maybe we all hoped he would have, but as efficiently or as safe as maybe we would have liked. But I think something like this will fit Connor Mobley's skill set even better too. So, does mean I would say might bring in a full blown fullback for the offense. That's an interesting one. I mean, anymore tight ends and fullbacks are kind of interchangeable. They've sort of hybridized both of those positions to be. There's essentially the way tight ends work now. Tight ends are either a big wide receiver or they are a fullback that is they're either Kyle Juszczyk or they're Kyle Pitts. They're one of the two Kyles. They're either a very good receiving tight end or they're a mostly blocking guy that can also get out on the pass. Those are basically the two kinds of tight ends that there are right now. And Carter says no more Maryland Eye. In contrast, you will see more Maryland Eye because the Maryland Eye was a direct result of Tyler Roll being in the program. We will see more Maryland Eye than we saw last year. We'll see, we saw plenty of it 2 years ago. We lost it last year with Rule being in the NFL. We are going to be getting Maryland Eye stuff back because they love to run that stuff, especially in short yardage and all that stuff. In those types of situations, where you got to have a couple yards type situations, they love that Maryland Eye stuff. And even in the middle of the field, they'll run it too. So I don't like the old school fullback. Like if you're thinking when you're thinking like a legit fullback, if you're thinking like a Mike Allstott, that kind of guy, that kind of fullback is kind of, I don't want to say it's dead, but it doesn't really exist anymore. The 260-pound running back that just also run blocks and all that. Anymore in modern offenses, if your fullback can't catch passes reliably, they can't really be on the field except for like specialty situations. But at that point, there's larger tight ends. There are some tackles that are mobile enough to be that kind of role. I mean, if we saw last year in goal line scenarios, they would bring in Vaya Ikakula, the guard. He's amazing now at Penn State, but they would, because he was pretty mobile. So they would essentially bring him in to kind of fulfill the role of that old school fullback because he was mobile and he could act as a pulling guard. They can act him as a lead blocker. He could do all that kind of stuff. But the traditional fullback, as you are probably thinking of it, like I said, the Mike Allstotts of the world, that type of fullback doesn't really exist anymore. And I really don't think it'll ever come back just because having a non-pass, no Patrick Ricards, but none of that. Like having a skill position player that can't catch the football is just not really an option as an every down player in today's game. It's non-viable. So what that is to say though, is they're going to find some versatile tight ends. They'll find pass catching tight ends. Like if Cooper Alexander sticks around, which if he wasn't, I would think he would already be like going. Um, Cooper Alexander, if he assuming he comes back, is a nice like that's your big wide receiver type tight end. He can block, but that's a big wide receiver type tight end. And then you've got other guys that they'll bring in. Tyler Fortenberry is kind of a hybrid. I would classify him more as a receiver than a blocker. But he can do a little bit of both. They'll probably bring in another guy that looks body type like somewhat like a traditional fullback, like a Sam Buckner kind of guy. Looks like a traditional fullback, but can catch the ball out of the backfield, stuff like that. I think they'll find places for people like that, especially in this offense. So, I'm the short answer to you is no, but kind of yes, because they'll fill that role as a modern football team would fill that role. So, we'll see. Let me see. Dom Overby is a receiver. He's a tall, fast receiver, basically. He's your speedster receiver if you're a college football 26 guy. The receivers, they've got a couple other ones. We'll talk about them in a second. In a few minutes anyways. We'll talk about some of those guys. But yeah, so Jalen Raynor, I think, is a good ad if you're trying to win now. He's veteran. He can take care of your offense for a year until you're ready to play Connor Moberly, or at least with the ball. Yeah. Well, because he's not in the program anymore, I'm gonna be more critical of him. I would say it's wide receiver coach. This last year or the last few years, anyways, that went to Penn State. I think I probably mentioned it in the Discord a few times, and I think I remember when Noah Pauly, I should say, is his name. Noah Pauly came from North Dakota State. When he showed up, I actually think I might have even texted CW talking about this, that I was a little dubious about Noah Pauly to start with coming out of North Dakota State, because I felt as though he was riding the wave of Christian Watson making it into the NFL, being a high pick. But you have to remember that like Christian Watson at the time, he's a tall speedster receiver, much like Dom Overby. But he came out of North Dakota State as an unpolished, gem type of thing. Like he was a guy, like he was a high upside prospect that was largely unpolished. Which in a vacuum is fine. But so I want to talk about this here in a second. When you're talking about a position coach, your receivers coming out of your school as unpolished prospects is not what I like to hear when you're talking about coaching them at the Power 5 level. When they're coming out of North Dakota State, when they're coming out of the FCS level in a run heavy offense, sure. But I'm not trying to have a bunch of unpolished receivers at Iowa State. I'm trying to have guys that do their job. And so you also give credit to Pauly for developing Noel. And I think there's like some merit to that. It's not like he was bad at his job. I mean, it's not like he just didn't do anything. But Noel, Jalen Noel was clearly a talent from the beginning. And you remember, like, Noah Pauly wasn't the receivers coach that I don't believe he was the coach that recruited Jalen to Ames. He was, obviously he helped him for a good chunk of his career, but he wasn't the guy that brought him to Ames. You can say, sure, he gets credit for developing Jalen Noel. Jaden Higgins was, maybe got a little bit better, but he was largely, I'm not gonna say he was like a finished product, but kind of coming out of Eastern Kentucky. I wouldn't say he was I don't think he needed a ton of developing. He just kind of needed to get in the flow of things. But let's say you give him credit for Jalen Noel, who is in the NFL now, and Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins both had tremendous rookie seasons for the Texans. Let's say you give him credit for those. What we saw this year out of the wide receiver room was completely unacceptable. I mean, straight up, there were the wide receivers were easily the worst position group on the entire team, and it's not even close. There was not one single guy in that entire room that consistently had the head consistently or that consistently caught the ball they didn't have drop problems. There was lots of guys that couldn't get open. There was some guys that like have the speed but didn't know how to use it. They were not running good routes. They were they were not catching the ball. And if it's like early season or it's a one-off game or something like that, fine, that shit happens. But if your position group is that bad from top to bottom the entire season and it never gets better, that is on the wide receivers coach. It is his job to make sure that his guys catch the fucking football. I'm sorry, but that was a horrendous job by Noah Pauley last year. I mean, maybe they're just taking to Penn State. He's like, well, if he's got better receivers, then he can help those guys. Great. But you know what? What he did last year for the wide receiver room was horrible. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't care about having Noah Paul. I did not want Noah Pauley back. I was dubious about him coming in. I gave him a longer leash because Jalen Noel got better. But besides Jalen Noel, nobody got better. And some people kind of got sort of worse. And the group was wildly inconsistent. And that falls 100% on Noah Pauley. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't care about it. I don't care about what Noah Pauley did. I'm fine with him being gone. And this group, I think you have some really interesting guys coming in. And I think having basically a complete overhaul of that position room is not a bad thing. Maybe I think Chase Soul clearly towards the end showed that he has some real talent. I think he probably will be pretty good at Penn State. But the fact that it took him, we know he was hurt and all that. The fact that like nobody in that room was consistent, even Brad Askelson dropped some, he was taking passes off his damn face mask. It's wild. But before we talk about some receivers, and I should warn you too. I mean, obviously we're 30 minutes into this already. That there's a lot of these guys that because they're coming from the FCS, because they're coming from different places, there's not a great way to compile like a highlight reel of these transfers. Like if you were looking for a highlight reel of Masai King, the offensive lineman from Akron, that's a whole thing where you're going back through and watching all of Akron's tape this season and putting together a supercut. Maybe someday we do that. That day is not today. So we'll go through them, but I don't have like really super in-depth, nerd out football tape of like the offensive line. It's just hard to find that kind of stuff without, putting hours and hours and hours and hours into it. I do want to talk about Tyler Fortenberry though. The receiver transfer from Arkansas State that I think is, especially if you can pair him up with Cooper Alexander, like if Cooper Alexander is coming back, I think if you can pair him up with Cooper Alexander, you've got a nice 1-2 punch there. There's a nice group there as well. And I think they've got their eye on another tight end or two. Not sure if they're going to probably grab one more. They'll grab maybe two more if Cooper Alexander decides to transfer, I guess. But I did find there's not a lot of great tape of him from Arkansas State. It was kind of funny because I was watching another game of theirs and the highlight went to a play but the announcers are talking about a play that had just happened where Tyler Fortenberry drug a bunch of defensive players down the field. I was like, damn, I really wish I could have seen that play. But I did find though is some highlights of him at East Mississippi Community College, which is where he went kind of between. He was there before Vanderbilt. So he went here, then went to Vanderbilt, left because he didn't get playing time, went to Arkansas State for a year, and now he's here. So, obviously that's a nice block on the outside there. He is a good blocker in pro style offenses where the tight ends are commonly asked to pull on, on split zones and stuff like that. He's mobile enough. He does a good job pulling across the line. Um, he's getting to the second level. Nice job there. Good clean route. Not obviously not a long highlight reel, but just kind of gives you an idea. This guy, he can do both. He's an accomplished enough blocker where you can keep him on the field. You can keep him on the field all 4 downs basically, and not worry about that you're getting bogged down with something.